Okay, and I'm going to spotlight you. And I'm going to say good evening, everybody, and welcome to a Jewish Council of North Central Florida book talk. And today we have the pleasure of being joined by author Jeffrey Breslow. And for those of you that aren't familiar with who he is, it's going to be fun, but also serious, because I know you have some serious things to talk about. Jeffrey Breslow is a preeminent toy and game inventor and designer, and he spent more than 41 years inventing toys and games since graduating with a BFA from the University of Illinois in industrial design. In 1976, at the wee age of 34, he became the youngest managing partner of Marvin Glass & Associates, the leading toy design company in the world. Glass & Associates created games such as Simon, Operation, one of my favorites, Gestures, the Evel Knievel motorcycle, Mousetrap, and Uno Attack. He was inducted to the National Toy Hall of Fame in New York City in 1988 and left the toy business in 2008 to sculpt full-time. His sculptures are on display at the University of Illinois and the Lurie Children's Hospital and on permanent display in Vermont, California, New Jersey, and Uruguay. Take it away, Jeffrey. And everybody, if you have any questions when Jeffrey's done, then we'll be happy to take questions at the end. So Jeffrey, I'm going to mute myself, but I'm here. If you need me, just shout.
Okay. So no questions, just I'll give you a little background about how I got in the toy business. I'll start by saying I wasn't a very good student in high school. I had one mentor in high school, and she was my art teacher, and that was my only A in high school. So I knew I was interested in that. I went to a small school, wasn't doing very well, but one weekend I went to University of Illinois to see some friends and ended up going in the the design building and saw a display of industrial design, which I had no idea what it was, sophomore industrial design, and the teacher was Ed Zagorski, and I was just blown away by the exhibit. A little further down the hall, his name was on a door, half open. I knocked and went in, and in 20 minutes, Ed Zagorski changed my life. He told me about design. The big thing was that form follows function. It has to work, and then it can look beautiful. If it looks beautiful and doesn't function, it's not a very good design. So that stuck with me my whole life. When I left there, I knew I wanted to transfer to the University of Illinois and be an industrial designer. So I got good grades enough to transfer, and then I had to start over as a freshman. So the first year and a half of college went down the drain, and I started over again. My parents weren't particularly thrilled, but they were happy that I was doing something that I loved. And in the School of Fine and Applied Arts, the first year is a basic year for everybody, whether you're industrial design, graphic design, interior design, sculpture, painting, you take all the same courses. But it wasn't until the second year that I got in Ed Zagorski's class, and that really changed my life. And we did many projects, but we did a toy project. And what they do in design is they jury grade. So there are 5 or 6 faculties that decide each project because it's totally subjective. And my children's modular furniture came in second. And I never had something that came in second ever in my schooling. And the first prize went to a little blue box that had a buzzer and some jagged shapes, and you put a probe in and it buzzed. And that was John Spinello, who was in the service and then came back to go to design school. And I said to John, what are you going to do with that? And he said, well, I've got an uncle that works for this guy by the name of Marvin Glass in Chicago. It's a toy design company. I said, you're kidding. He said, no, my uncle works for this guy. So John graduated ahead of me. He actually went to see Marvin for a job. Marvin wasn't hiring, but he said, I'll give you $500 for that box. And John sold him the box for $500. And at that time, the in-state tuition at the University of Illinois was under $500, $480 some. So it was more than the semester tuition. So John sold the box. The box went on to become the operation game that Marvin Glass ended up doing. So that's how I knew about Marvin. I ended up designing medical equipment and supplies, but I spent 2 years of my own time designing toys and games only to get a job with Marvin. That's all I wanted to do was work for this guy, because I read everything about him. This was before the internet. I had to go to periodicals in the library, look him up. So on actually April 11th, 1967, Tuesday, 10 o'clock in the morning, I got hired by Marvin Glass. And it was a huge day for me. And I was very good at designing toys and games. And after about 18 months, Marvin Glass made me a partner in the company. And I went on to run the company after Marvin was gone. And then myself and my two partners started Big Monster Toys. So I ended up spending 41 years in the toy and game and design business, which was quite extraordinary for me. And when I left that a number of years ago, I went on to sculpt full time, and that's what I'm doing now. I'm a full-time sculptor. So the idea of retiring wasn't in my vocabulary. The R word is not something I wanted to do. But I knew when I left the toy business that I would end up becoming a full-time sculptor, and that's what I do now. So it was a wonderful career. You know, our clients were, what's interesting is the history of the toy business in the United States was predominantly run by Jewish people. Ideal Toys, Hasbro, Mattel, Kenner. I think the only ones that weren't run by Jews at that time was Parker Brothers and Milton Bradley. But predominantly big and small companies were Louis Marx. A great many Jewish people were in the toy business early on in our country. Anyhow, that's a quick bio. There's a lot more going on in my book. I don't know how many of you read the book, but it was a project that I started actually 7 years ago. And it was primarily for my grandsons, my sons and grandsons. And it was motivated by my father's father. I had 3 of my grandparents came from Russia. My 4th grandparent came from Belarus, all Jewish people. And my grandfather, who came from Kiev, which was Kiev back then, was put on a boat by his parents when he was 17 years old in 1907, 08, and came to the United States. And my family name was Breslowski, but at Ellis Island, it was too long, so they changed it to Breslow. So my grandfather, my father's father, taught me how to drive a car. He taught me how to fish. I worked with him at my dad's factory. He taught me how to pack things. And on my 21st birthday, my father's father, my grandfather Jacob, had a heart attack and died. And I never asked him any questions about his childhood. I never asked him what it was like to be on a boat. How could he leave his family? So I always regretted that I didn't have enough smarts. I thought he'd be around a lot longer to ask him about his life. So the motivation for writing the book was because I had an interesting life, was for my 4 grandsons primarily. And I started it 7 years ago. It took me about, year and a half, 2 years to write the book. And then I went through 3 different editors before I ended up with, the one I did the book with. And then it took a year to get it published. So it was a long project. Anyhow, so that's my basic reason I wrote my book. I never thought it would be a bestseller. That wasn't why I was doing it. It was really a history of my life for my grandkids. So any questions about anything? I'm kind of doing it as brief as I can. There's an awful lot in the book. One chapters, I went to the Soviet Union in 1981. I was very involved in Chicago Action for Soviet Jewry, an organization in Highland Park, Illinois, just north of Chicago. And I went with my first wife and 2 other couples, and we spent 8 days in Moscow, Leningrad, and Kiev, visiting refuseniks. And although I had been to Israel before that, it was much more emotional being in a country where Jews were persecuted. They wanted to leave. They lost their jobs. They were fired from work. They were put in homes with community apartments to live with people. So it was quite an experience. If you haven't read the book, it's one of my favorite chapters in the book about my experience in the Soviet Union in 1981 in Moscow, Leningrad, and Kiev. Any questions? It's easier if you ask me questions. Anybody?
If anybody has any questions, we're a small group, so just feel free to jump in. If not, counting 1, counting 2, counting 3.
Oh.
Jeffrey, take it away.
What kind of, I have a question.
Sure.
What kind of sculpting do you do now? I didn't really have a chance to look into it. I'd like to know what you sculpt.
Well, I sculpted a little bit in college, okay? And I was doing figurative work. I studied with a man by the name of Frank Gallo, who went on to be quite an accomplished sculptor. He was my teacher. And then when I started the toy business, I didn't do any work at all. And then when 2 or 3 years before I was going to leave the toy business, I started doing figurative sculpture. So doing sculpting of figures in clay that were then cast in bronze. I didn't do the bronze casting, somebody else did that, but I did figurative work, and I studied with a woman by the name of Susan Clenard. She was my teacher and mentor for 4 years, only doing figurative work. And I work with models, I work from photographs. I ended up doing a fundraiser for Comer Children's Hospital, University of Chicago Children's Hospital in Chicago. And I have 2 little boys that are in the permanent collection of the hospital. And then I studied with Susan for 4 years, and then my work started to change. I started doing abstract work with pieces of trees and wood and stones and boulders. And then I moved on to doing abstract work with boulders and steel. I've also done some figurative work of kids, which are silhouettes of children. I have a piece at a music school in Chicago. I have a piece at Lurie Children's Hospital with little kids, one in a wheelchair, so it's kind of gone all over the place. But right now I'm doing a lot of kinetic moving work with boulders and stone and steel. And I have a giant piece in Uruguay that I installed back in March. And I was down in Uruguay again in this fall. And this piece of sculpture that's down there is connected with an event that happened 50 years ago, Alive, with the plane crash in the Andes, a book by Piers Paul Reed about how 16 people survived the plane crash living up in 12,000 feet in the Andes. And I ended up knowing one of the survivors. I met all the survivors. So I did a kinetic piece that's now permanently down in Uruguay, in Punta del Este, about 80 miles outside of Montevideo. So that's kind of the work that I'm doing now. It's kind of mostly abstract work, even though I started with figurative work.
Debbie, you have your hand up. And then after Debbie, I'd like to hear more about inspiration for some of the toys that we know about that you were involved in getting going. But Debbie, you want to ask your question first?
Yeah, I was just curious. So first of all, I didn't realize that most of the toy companies at that time were with had such a Jewish influence. That's really interesting. I did not know that.
Yes,
huh?
Very much so.
Interesting. But I'm curious. So I am curious. What was the work environment like? Was it really? Did you just feel like there was creativity around you all the time, or did it feel more kind of like a tradition, what we would think of as a traditional corporation? Talk to me about that.
Far from a traditional corporation. I mean, Marvin Glass, who hired me, invented the business of independent toy design in the late 50s. Okay. Marvin was a very creative guy. He tried to manufacture toys in Chicago, and he kept losing his ass. Said, I don't want to do that anymore. And he looked at the book business, he looked at the record business and said, I want to do that in the toy business. I want to design toys and games and dolls and license them to the toy companies and get paid a royalty, like you do in the book business, like you do in the record business. And it was very difficult for him to do that because all of these companies had their own design departments. But Marvin's first company that he started with in the late 50s was Ideal Toy Company out of New York. And that was Lionel Weintraub was the son-in-law of the founder, Ben Michtam, who did the teddy bear a long, long time ago. So that was Marvin's first client. He said to him, I'm going to show you designs. You sign a non-disclosure. You're not going to steal my things. And if you like what I show you, we'll make a deal and you'll pay me a royalty. Give me an advance and then pay me a royalty. So that was his idea. And his first big client was Ideal. And back in the late 50s, early 60s, it was Mr. Machine, Mousetrap Game, Robot Commando, Kissy Doll. He did a lot of toys and dolls and games for Ideal Toy. And then he spread out into other companies. Ultimately, Marvin worked for all the companies, Mattel, Hasbro, Fisher-Price, Louis Marks, on. Were all eventually clients of Marvin. So he created this business, but the environment you asked about was, we had machinery in the shop. The machinery was not gray. It was red, yellow, blue, green, painted machinery. It was a very creative environment to be in. We built a train that went around the top of the little scale train and went around the top of the shop and the design area. We had a giant giraffe, a stuffed giraffe that was 15 feet tall in the big space. So we filled the space with things that were inspiring. But what was inspiring is being together with all these creative people, coming up with ideas for dolls and games and toys. So it was an environment that, and what made it so special is that we work for all the companies. If you went to work as a designer for Fisher Price, you're only doing preschool products. If you went to work as a designer for Parker Brothers, you're only doing games. But we could do everything. And that was what made it so special. If we had an idea that wasn't even in the toy business, we did it. And my partner, Howard Morrison, had an idea in the mid-70s to do a telephone that was Mickey Mouse, an actual telephone. And we ended up licensing that thing, not to AT&T. We went to AT&T and they laughed at us. They said, that's not a phone, that's a toy. No, it actually works. You can pick up the arm and talk. And so a small company made it and it was a huge success. So we would do anything, any idea, anything you can come up with, we would find an outlet for. We ended up going into the novelty gum business, making novelty toy type of gum. So the environment was such that there wasn't anything we couldn't work on, anything we couldn't do, and that allowed for a very creative atmosphere.
Cassie, I think you have a question.
I know we want to move on, but my kids are listening in and out, especially my oldest, and he wanted me to ask if you had to choose, what is your all-time favorite toy?
Wow, that's, you know what? It's always, the favorite one was always the one I was working on next, okay? But going way back, one that's 50 years old was Ants in the Pants, and was the second thing I had ever done, at this point, 50, 60 years ago. So that's certainly a favorite because of the nostalgia of it. I did a thing called Masterpiece Game, which was an art auction game connected with Prince from the Art Institute of Chicago, which is another favorite. Simon, of course, was not mine, but my partner Howard did that. So it's hard to say which is the favorite. It's like asking which is your favorite grandkid that you have. It's very difficult. You like them all, So, but those were some of the highlight ones of many, many. But you need to know that the business is built on failure. You fail much more than you succeed. I mean, on and on. It's in the entertainment world, which is the toy design business, movies, theater, dance, Broadway, television, fail. And that's part of the process. And if you can't accept that, you're in the wrong business. You're in the creative business, it's the wrong business for you. Other professions, you can't fail. You're a surgeon, you can't fail. You're an accountant, you can't fail. There are many things you can't fail at, but in the creative world, it's part of the process.
Okay, why don't we go on a bit? I actually, instead of me asking a question, Jeffrey, why don't we let you continue on talking about what you were going to talk about? Do you have vignettes that you want to talk about from your career, or would you rather take questions?
Well, I like questions. I mean, I try to kind of cover a lot of stuff quickly. We don't have that much time, 41 years, but part of the creative business is built on pressure, on deadlines, okay? And if you don't have deadlines, if you're an artist and you have a show coming up, you're working. If you have a deadline for something else, you're working. You have a book, you have a deadline. So the creative world is built on pressure. And the pressure is such that you have to modulate it. You can't be under pressure all the time, so it ebbs and flows. But we work to clients coming in. If we had 2 or 3 weeks with no clients, things slow down. But if we have a client coming in, everything picks up. Everything is working for that client, okay? When that client's gone, we're working for the next client and then the next client. So that's how pressure is an important part of the creative process, not just in the toy business, but in movies, films, theater, dance, book, pretty much music, everything.
I have a question. I was doing a little bit of reading about you, and oh, by the way, you mentioned Masterpiece. I had that. I remember playing that. I had forgotten about it till you mentioned it.
It was
it was fun. It was very sophisticated. I don't know. But I read in something about you that you were involved with working on, in the 80s, I think it was, working on a game related to Donald Trump, of all people. Now, we won't get into politics, but I'm curious about how that went and what it was like.
So my partner, Ruben, his wife was a very successful retailer in Chicago. She was a dynamo. At one time, she had 8 or 10 stores in Chicago. She had Louis Vuitton, Christophe, Mont Blanc, Benetton. She ran kind of a small empire of these high-end fashion stores, okay? In 1987, she opened her first store in Trump Tower in New York City, okay? And Ruben comes in with The Art of the Deal. I was doing games. Ruben was doing mechanical dolls. My partner, Howard, was doing other stuff. So Ruben hands me the book, The Art of the Deal. He said, if you come up with an idea for a game, Nina, his wife, confident that she can get us a meeting with Trump in New York. I said, you're kidding. No, she knows, she never met Trump, but she dealt with the manager of the retail in Trump Tower because she had a store in Trump Tower, okay? So I made a board game. It was a few things were interesting. There were boxes on the board. One was a casino, a golf course, a condo, a hotel, and you kept stuffing money in these boxes. And then at some point, the box came up for auction and you bid with the other players, and then you got a chance to see whether you made a good deal or a bad deal. You overpaid for the box. Anyhow, it was, it wasn't, that was the gist of the game, okay? We also made a box. We never make boxes, but we took his picture from the book. We made a box, gold and black box with his picture on it, and it was called Trump the Game. And then the line underneath was, it's not whether you win or lose, but whether you win, was the line on the box, okay? And now we had money. So we had his pick. When I read the book, I said, this is a guy with an incredible ego. If we're gonna pitch something, it's gotta, So the smallest bill was $10 million with his picture on there, and went up to $100 million bills, not monopoly money, $1 in $500, but $10 million to $100 million bills with his picture on it. So now we have this beautiful prototype. We have the box. We have everything, his picture, everything else. So we get a meeting. So Ruben and I fly to New York to meet with him. And I said to Ruben, I want to stop at a bookstore. So I picked up 3 copies of his book, Art of the Deal. He said, what are you going to do with that? I said, well, I have an idea. See, I don't know if the meeting goes well. Okay. So we go in the Trump Tower. We sit in a lobby, gigantic lobby, and we're waiting 2:00 meeting on a Tuesday. This was fall of 1987. Okay. So September 1987. And the elevator opens up, out he walks. Oh, we were told ahead of time, if you get a meeting with him, he's germaphobe, don't shake hands. He won't shake your hand, okay? Okay. So now we're sitting in the lobby, elevator opens up, he nods and walks in. I said, well, they can't tell us he's not here. He was 10 minutes before our meeting. He's a big guy. I mean, he looked like a football player. So at 2:00, on the money, not a minute ahead of 2, a minute behind him, 2:00, we're in his office, okay? And he's sitting, gigantic office, 50 magazine covers on the wall, okay, with him on every cover, window overlooking Central Park, okay? He's sitting at his, my battery is a little low. We might run out in about 10 minutes. Anyhow, he's sitting in his jacket on, his red tie. He said hello, let's see what you got. No small talk, okay? No shaking hands. So we walk over to the table. I open it up. He loves the box. When he saw it's not whether you win or lose, but whether you win, we got a thumbs up. Okay. I laid out the game. I showed him the money, another thumbs up. I rolled the dice. He said, I like it. What's next? Okay. He didn't even play the game. I said, well, I'm going to pitch it to my 3 biggest accounts and I'll come back to you with a deal. He said, okay. I said, would you do me a favor? He said, what? Would you sign some books for me? He said, sure. So he sits down at his desk, takes out his big felt tip pen. The first one, president of Parker Brothers. Second one, president of Milton Bradley. Third one, president of Mattel. I got another big thumbs up. Okay, meeting's over. Maybe 10 minutes. That was it. All done. So now I go back to Chicago and I call Mel Taft, who's now deceased, who was the senior vice president of Milton Bradley. I says, Mel, I just came back from New York. We got Trump. He said, I'll be there tomorrow. So he flew out to see me the very next day only to see the Trump game, okay, from East Longmeadow, Massachusetts. So I showed him the game and I said, this is not our usual deal. He said, what do you mean? I said, this is Trump. Okay. Now I was in my mid 30s when and I was just, so royalty would be typical 5%. Okay. I said, the royalty is 12%. Come on, it's Trump. And usually in advance on a game like this, maybe 50,000 advance. I said, the advance is 500,000. He says, come on. He said, I can't make the decision myself. He said, I got to talk to the chairman. I got to talk to the president. I said, I won't show it to any of your competitors until you tell me no. So he flies back. He calls me the next day. And he said to me, he talked to the president, he talked to the chairman, way too expensive. I said, okay. He said, but we got a deal. I said, okay. I called my two partners. We're jumping up and down like idiots. The biggest deal we ever made. I called Trump. I called the secretary. I said, I need another meeting. Okay. So I flew to New York the next day by myself. Ruben didn't come with me. And I go into his office. The first meeting was the lawyer, the guy from retail, Trump, Ruben, and myself. Second meeting, just Trump and me. So I walk in. He might have said hello. He said, what's the deal? So I told him what I just told you, okay? And I said, and I point to myself and I says 50-50. He said, I don't do 50-50. He says 60-40. I said, okay, we have a deal. He could have said 70-30. He could have said 80-20. He knew without him, I had nothing to sell, but he didn't hold me up. So here's a guy, every meeting, right on time, on the money. Then he said, 60-40, we have a deal. He said, what do I need to do? I said, in February 1988, you should go to Toy Fair in New York. He said, I'll be there. I said, it'd be great if you can fly up to East Longmeadow, Massachusetts when they're coming off the assembly lines. He said, I'll do that. He said, go talk to my lawyer, tell him the deal, and he'll write up the papers. That was it. Next time I saw him was at Toy Fair. And he went up to Milton Bradley when they were coming off the line. 9 years later, I did the Apprentice game with him. He recorded the voice and everything else. It was a better game than the Trump game, but it was a little too expensive. So I had 4 meetings with him. Every meeting was on time. Everything he said he would do, he did. Did I ever think he'd be president? No. Okay. But I'm saying my experience was quite extraordinary with him. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there are people that say, they did real estate with him and this and that, whatever. But it was a fun project. The game had a very short life, 2 or 3 years. We knew that was it. I mean, this was not Masterpiece. This was not Monopoly. This was not Ants in the Pants. This was not something that was going to last. But it was a fun project for me. And the whole story that I just told you is part of the book. Anyhow.
Cassie, you have a question, and then I have a question.
I was going to say, I mean, there must be something to it, aside from the fact he became president, because it's currently, that game is on Amazon going for $100. So there you go.
You know what? One of my partners, after I left the business, talked about redoing the game when he became president. And then he heard on the radio that Trump said, running for president's not a game. He said that. And we said, nobody's going to do the game again. It had its time. It had its place. It wasn't something you could bring back. That's all. I mean, we never tried. I was gone from the business, and my other partners didn't try and do anything with him at all. Yeah.
I have a question about deciding, since you said you knew that the game with Trump was only going to be a short-lived game. I mean, when you were developing something, what kind of struck you? How did you know that something might be short-term, and what was the investment of time and effort as opposed to something that you felt was going to have a longevity?
It was short-term, but because it was with personality. Okay, we did Evel Knievel toys in the mid-70s. Okay, it had a life to it. He got himself in trouble. I didn't particularly like him, but he was a huge showman, and we made a fortune. We paid him a fortune. It was very successful. I didn't care for him as an individual. I had all kinds of trouble, but it was very successful. But we knew we got 5 years out of it, and it was terrific. So tying in with a property, tying in with toys with Harry Potter movies, it has a life to it. And certain ones go on, Disney, Mickey Mouse, other things, but other ones have a built-in life. So we just knew that tied in with a character, a personality, it has a limit to it. That's all. I mean, and sometimes maybe there's an exception to it, that something does go on, but Barbie is not a real character. It's not a person. It's not somebody that's going to ever get in trouble. It's not somebody that's going to, die. It's not, so when you tying in with somebody, there is a built-in life to it. That's all there's.
Interesting. I don't want to go too dark, but people may not know that you went through a traumatic experience at your workplace. If you want to just briefly tell us and how that shaped, if you want to talk about it, if it's okay.
Sure. I'm only concerned about, I'm not on my pad, I'm on my phone, and it gave me a warning. So I don't want to get cut off. But this happened, a long time ago. I mean, it happened 45 years ago.
You might want to explain what it is, because I've read about it, but I don't know if everybody else did.
Well, we had an employee who worked for us for 7 years. Okay. He was an electrical engineer. This was before electronics. He did motors and batteries and buzzers and things like that. He was a guy that worked for us 7 years. My partner knew him in another company, quiet guy. He had gotten raises. He had no competition. He just came back from delivering a design in New York. And they went out and celebrated. And he shows up on a Tuesday morning at work with 2 guns and basically up to the main conference room. Marvin was gone by then. He had died from cancer and other things 2 years before this happened. So Marvin wasn't around, but Anson Isaacson was the managing partner. We had meetings in the morning. There were only 3 of us left. There were 9 or 10 partners, and he knew every morning we had a meeting at 10 o'clock to talk about the business for the day. So I was left with 2 of my partners. The meeting broke up. I went across the hall to answer a phone call. So Anson and Joe were left in the office, and Al came up and opened the back door, expecting to see 8 or 10 partners. He saw 2 partners, and he shot and killed both of them. And I was across the hall. I heard the shots. I put the phone call on hold, and I walked across. And I didn't see the shooter. He went in the back. But I saw Anson, who was shot in the face twice with a 9mm, and Joe was shot in the chest 3 times. And he looked at me and fell and died. And then Keller went in the back and killed a young girl that worked, shot some other people. And then in front of his own office, he shot and killed himself. And then it was all over. And that was it. So it was very difficult to put all the pieces back together. But this is something that happens, today, kind of on a regular basis that we know about. Way back then, it wasn't instantly known to everybody in the world what just went on. But it was difficult to put all the pieces back together, but we did. We were in a fun, successful toy business, and we had to keep it going. We had 70 people that worked for us at that time.
Yeah, that must have been so hard, because yes, toys are fun, and just to go forward and to keep going after you've been through that kind of trauma must have been very difficult. But
we managed it, and we became successful again. I mean, we did. You have to, those types of things you have to put behind you. You can't. We with 70 employees and the families and everything, we were supporting maybe a couple hundred people with a successful business. So there's no question we had to move on. Yeah. All right.
So,
one question. I'm going to have to say goodbye. I'm going to run
okay, because you're running out. Does anybody have a question, or I can ask a fun question? Does anybody have a? If not, my fun question is, since you talk about atmosphere, and I kept thinking about the movie Big, and where they got to try out toys. So was that at all realistic in your offices? Was it fun? Did people play with toys? What was it like?
Waiting for that question. That movie is very old, but everybody asked me the same question. Okay, I mean, it's amazing.
Oh, really? I'm not unique.
No, I'm sorry. I've been asked that question without exaggerating 50 times since that movie came out. I mean, it's just it would. So first of all, he played a marketing guy. He wasn't a toy designer. He was a marketing kid. But it had a huge impact. I mean, the movie was a fabulous movie. The fact that as an actor, he played an 8-year-old little boy convincingly, as an adult, which was wonderful. It was a wonderful movie. But, it's still a business. You're still trying to come up with ideas, and the business part of it was very easy to do. It's just because in the course of a year, we would generate 600-700 ideas that we'd start working on, put them in a book, put a number. And then maybe we'd present 150, maybe we'd sign contracts on 25 or 30, and maybe there'd be 5, 6 that would pay for everything. A movie studio makes 20 movies, and 2 of them pay for all the failures. So that was the nature of the business. But it was a fun business for me. I loved it. I loved it every day I was there. It was a fun place to work, fun people to work with, exciting, dynamic people. And I feel very blessed that I had that kind of career for 41 years, and to make kids happy, entertain children.
And grown-ups too.
And grow.
And grown-ups who play games.
I thank you so much. It's been lovely.
Jeffrey,
And-
thank you. I'm glad we were able to get this in before your phone dies, but thank you for taking the time to speak to us. We appreciate you, and I'll have to read more about your background. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everybody for tuning in, and we've recorded this so we can share it with everybody else who wasn't able to make it.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good job. Sorry for that while.